Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto's destiny was to be loved by 1,000 women, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto Uzumaki sat at the back of the classroom, twitching in anticipation. He had finally achieved the first step towards achieving his dreams. The young ninja, after 3 failed attempts at the Genin graduation exam, had finally proven his worth to both Iruka-sensei and the third Hokage by assisting Iruka and defeating the traitor, Mizuki. The young blonde had barely left his sensei's side since the ordeal, spending many hours in the hospital keeping his favorite person company while the older Chunin healed. The scarred teacher had finally been released the day before, just in time to hand out team assignments. After reading out the teams, Iruka left the newly minted genin to their fates, though he had given Naruto a discreet thumbs up on his way out the door. The other genin's Jonin senseis had already come and gone, taking their new students with them. First had been Kurenai, a surprisingly young woman clad almost exclusively in bandages. Her long dark hair and pale skin contrasted sharply with her crimson eyes, and Naruto could tell that Kiba Inazaka was much happier with his team assignments after she had shown up. Before the Jonin had arrived, Kiba had been complaining incessantly about being stuck with the 2 quietest people in the class. To be fair, Naruto didn't think Shino had said more than 2 words in the entire time he'd known the Aburame. His sunglasses and trench coat further supported his aloof demeanor. The final member of Team 8, Hinata Hyuga, was just as quiet, though in a completely different way. She was extremely shy, constantly blushing and stuttering over her words. Naruto had often caught her pale lavender gaze staring at him longingly, though he couldn't quite figure out why. Honestly, it was a little unnerving. The one time he'd called her out on it, she'd blushed, stammered an apology, then run away. After Team 8's departure, a tall Jonin who had introduced himself as Asuma Sarutobi had arrived. The man had a distinct, "I don't care," look about him, aided by the lit cigarette jutting from his mouth. Naruto had wondered if the bearded ninja was related to the third Hokage, but he hadn't had a chance to ask him, as he had gathered the Ino Shika Cho trio with startling efficiency. Naruto had been a little depressed that he hadn't been on Shikamaru and Choji's team, as they were easily the closest friends he had. Shikamaru Nara, while lazy, was always up for getting out of class, and wherever Shikamaru went, Choji Akamichi was sure to follow. Naruto smiled, remembering a particularly pleasant day of playing hooky with his friends. They'd wound up in one of the lesser-used training grounds, laying on the grass and watching the clouds. Choji had brought snacks, of course, and Shikamaru had quickly used the opportunity for a nap. For his part, Naruto was just grateful that he had someone to hang out with. Ino Yamanaka rounded out Team 10, and she was easily Naruto's least favorite. She was loud, bossy, and her group of followers had constantly belittled Naruto's classroom failures. The Yamanaka heiress hadn't taken part herself, but he knew that she privately agreed with them. One of the most embarrassing moments of his school career had been at their hands, and Naruto didn't think he'd be forgiving any of them anytime soon. Only 3 newly minted genin remained in the classroom. Team 7, Naruto knew, was an oddity. First of all, it was the only genin team he knew of that had 2 kunoichi. Secondly, no one on the team got along at all. Sakura Haruno disliked Naruto because of his friendly, if one-sided, rivalry with her crush, Kiba. The Inazaka boy was all too eager to pound Naruto into the dirt as often as he could, though he was just as quick to help Naruto up and dust him off with a laugh. The blonde had never come close to beating him, being smaller and less skilled than his opponent. Kiba was the highest-ranked boy in the class, after all, and Naruto had barely passed by the skin of his teeth through a technicality. Sakura's dislike of Naruto stemmed from a certain incident, over a month ago, when the Rosette had finally worked up the courage to ask Kiba for a date. Before she could, however, Naruto had interrupted, challenging Kiba to yet another spar. Kiba had accepted right away, and the boys had left Sakura standing alone outside the academy. She'd never forgiven Naruto, even though she'd gotten her date the very next day. The third member of Team 7 was an enigma. Satsuki Uchiha was startlingly beautiful, with long, wild ebony locks that seemed permanently tied back in a ponytail that touched her waist. All of the boys admired her, though she'd never once accepted any of their offers to take her out. She rarely spoke, turning the boys down with a silent glare, her onyx eyes flashing with annoyance. She'd quickly earned a reputation as an ice queen. Naruto didn't think he existed, to be honest. She'd never once spoken to him, and he was too intimidated to join the throng of boys vying for her attention. Satsuki was also the first kunoichi to earn the coveted top rank in an academy class. Many of the adults hailed her as a genius and a prodigy. She excelled in all their coursework and had never lost a taijutsu match in her entire time at the academy. If she hadn't been so breathtakingly beautiful, the boys in Naruto's class probably would have been sore at losing to a girl, but they were too busy falling over themselves to get her attention to care. The girls in the class hated her, Naruto knew. Invisible as he was, he'd often overhear snippets of their conversations. Their insults were contradictory, which confused Naruto to no end. They'd call her a whore 1 minute, then accuse her of being a lesbian, then laugh at the fact that she'd never had a boyfriend. He'd once held quite the flame for Sakura, but after listening to her and Ino viciously verbally abuse Satsuki behind her back, his crush had all but disappeared. He hated bullies, and the pink-haired genin was a lot less attractive after that. Beauty on the outside only counted for so much. The Rosette in question was currently pacing the aisles, ranting about their new sensei's lateness. Naruto privately agreed, though he'd never admit it. Weren't Jonin supposed to be responsible? Satsuki was brooding, as usual, her onyx gaze staring out the window. She seemed unperturbed by this, Kakashi's tardiness, suffering the long wait in silence. It struck Naruto just how different they all were. Satsuki was the least outspoken person in the class, rivaling even Shino, while Sakura was arguably the loudest. Naruto himself was somewhere in the middle. When he got excited, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, but for the most part he was able to keep himself under control. He guessed that he had Shikamaru and Choji to thank for that. He'd realized a while ago that if he wanted to have friends, he'd have to curb his more annoying impulses. It helped that his rivalry with Kiba was so friendly. Despite the regular beatdowns, Naruto quite liked the Inazaka, so it was hard to get too mad at him. Now, though, Naruto was getting bored. There was only so long that he could sit still, and he'd finally reached his limit. Reaching into one of the pouches attached to the pants of his bright orange jumpsuit, Naruto pulled out a kunai and balanced it on the tip of his index finger. The movement caught Satsuki's attention, but after she ascertained that Naruto wasn't a threat, she quickly lost interest and resumed staring out the window. The kunai balancing was one of Naruto's ways of coping with his hyperactive mind. It took a lot of concentration, which kept his thoughts from wandering to less pleasant things. His current record was just shy of 10 minutes, and he was hoping that his new sensei would show up before he had a chance to top it. Almost prophetically, the door to the classroom opened, revealing a ninja who was undoubtedly a jonin. His green flak vest notwithstanding, the man carried himself with the type of confidence that was earned 100 times over. His white hair seemed to defy gravity, and his face was almost completely covered by a black mask, while his headband sat diagonally on his head. The skewed headband hid his right eye. Naruto briefly wondered how he could fight like that, considering how important both eyes were for depth perception. "You're late," Sakura shouted, pointing an accusatory finger, before realizing who she was talking to. She blushed and mumbled an apology. The Jonin quirked his visible eyebrow, then turned to his two remaining students. "Sorry I'm late, but I had to save a puppy from drowning. I'm sure you understand." His drawl was like the rest of him, laid back and relaxed. "My name is Kakashi Hatake, and I'll be your new sensei. My first impression of this group is, we have a lot of work to do. Let's adjourn to the roof and get started." The Jonin closed his visible eye in what Naruto assumed was a smile. It was hard to tell with the mask. "It has quite the view, don't you think?" Before any of them could reply, he disappeared in a whirlwind of smoke and leaves. Satsuki stood and stretched, and Naruto couldn't help but watch out of the corner of his eye. Her lithe form was accentuated by her tight blue tank and spandex shorts that barely reached past the middle of her thighs. He glanced away quickly, knowing that getting caught looking wasn't worth the view. Kiba had made that mistake once, and only once. She strode out of the room, her long ponytail swishing hypnotically behind her. Sakura apparently recovered from the embarrassment of shouting at her sensei. She cast a dark look in Naruto's direction, as if it was his fault that she'd embarrassed herself, and followed Satsuki out the door, leaving Naruto alone. Sighing, the blonde slid his kunai back into his pouch. Kakashi was right. This group had a lot of work to do, Naruto most of all. 5 minutes later, all three genin sat on a small set of steps, Kakashi across from them. Naruto, by virtue of arriving last, had been stuck in the middle of the two kunoichi. Their small perch had forced the team to sit closer than any of them would have liked, though no one voiced their discomfort aloud. Despite their differences, all three were staring at Kakashi with similar expressions, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "Now, I think we'd best start by introducing ourselves. The most important part of any team is teamwork, and you can't work as a team without knowing each other." Kakashi looked at each of the genin in turn, as if he was imparting the most important wisdom he could ever give them. A shinobi who doesn't follow the rules is trash, but one who abandons his team is worse than trash. To give you an example, I'll start. My name is Kakashi Hatake. My likes, well, are none of your business. My dislikes, are private. My goals, I don't feel like sharing those. Any questions? Naruto was pretty sure that Kakashi was joking, but before he could say anything, Sakura exploded next to him. "What was that? You didn't tell us anything," she accused, before blushing again and covering her mouth. Kakashi just gave her one of his eye smiles. "You're welcome to show me how it's done, Sakura." The rosette stood, brushing her hair over her shoulder. "You bet I will. My name is Sakura Haruno. I like my boyfriend, Kiba, and reading." Her blush intensified, while Naruto and Satsuki shared a look of disbelief. He couldn't believe that the first thing Sakura wanted her new sensei to know about her was that she had a boyfriend. After collecting herself, the girl continued. "I dislike harlots and show-offs," she said, casting a dark look to each of her new teammates. "My dreams, well," the girl tapered off, a frown on her pretty face. "I don't know. I guess I want to know more about chakra, and why it varies so much from person to person." Kakashi quirked a brow as she returned to her seat. "Interesting. Naruto." Naruto stood, following Sakura's example. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, training, and hanging out with Choji, Shika, and Kiba. I dislike bullies and people who judge others. My goal is to become the Hokage, and I won't let anything get in the way of that, believe it. He had started off talking at a normal decibel level, but had inadvertently started shouting halfway through. The blonde noticed Satsuki giving him an odd look, different from her usual haughty glares. He shifted uncomfortably under the unfamiliar gaze, quickly sitting. If Kakashi was impressed by Naruto's declaration, he didn't show it. Instead, he turned to the team's final member. Satsuki, unlike the others, didn't stand. She just leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. My name is Satsuki Uchiha. I hate a lot of things, and I don't particularly like anything. I don't have a dream, because I will make it a reality. I'm going to restore my clan and kill a certain someone. Her dark eyes burned with restrained passion. It was the most passionate Naruto had ever seen her, and it was actually really attractive, not that he'd tell her that in a million years. He liked his boy parts right where they were. Kakashi still seemed unimpressed, but nodded along as if Satsuki's introduction was exactly what the Jonin expected it to be. Well, that's enough for today. Tomorrow will mark our first team exercise, which might also be our last. It will determine whether or not I will take you on as students. He smiled at the Genin's puzzled faces. Don't you know that there is a final test beyond the Genin final exam? If you fail, then all three of you will be washed out into the Shinobi Corp, so you'd better take it seriously. All three of their faces morphed from puzzlement to shock. Meet me at Training Ground 7 at 0700. The silver-haired Jonin turned to leave. By the way, I'd skip breakfast if I were you. You'll just throw it up anyway. With a final jaunty wave, he disappeared in another puff of smoke and leaves, his students staring after him. This team sucks, Sakura whined after a long moment. I'm going home. Maybe I'll wake up in the morning and this will all be a horrible nightmare. The rosette disappeared through the rooftop door, and when Naruto turned around, Satsuki was standing in front of him, her arms crossed beneath her chest. If you do anything to mess things up tomorrow, I'll castrate you, she said, her voice low. Her dark eyes bored into his. Do we understand each other, Dobi? Yeah, the blonde replied, shifting in discomfort under her gaze. Don't worry about it. I got this. You'd better, she snarled, before leaping off the roof, her long hair streaming behind her. What a weird day, Naruto commented to the empty rooftop. Naruto, following his sensei's instructions, skipped breakfast the following morning. The last thing he wanted was to be puking his guts out in front of two girls. While he wasn't into either of them that way, he was still a teenage boy, and they were still girls. Besides, girls talked. Well, Sakura did, at any rate. Her legendary gossip skills were second only to Ino's, and Naruto was sure that if he messed up at all today that their entire graduating class would know about it before dinner. The rest of the village would probably know before breakfast the next day. Besides, Satsuki's threat of castration was looming over his head, so it would be best if he just avoided making any stupid mistakes. Naruto chugged the last of his milk before dressing in one of his trademarked orange jumpsuits. It was a little small on him, showing too much wrist and ankle, and was too tight across the chest. As much as he liked them, he figured that it might be time to retire his favorite outfit. It was hardly appropriate for field missions, after all. The neon orange would make him stick out like a sore thumb in any environment, making stealth a nigh impossibility. Sighing, he resolved that after today's test he'd go clothes shopping. Thankfully, he'd just received his last spending stipend from the Hokage's office, so he could easily afford it. He had intended on buying a new kunai set, as his well-worn set was looking worse for wear. The hard steel had grown soft from frequent sharpening, and they had slightly lost their balance, which would impair his accuracy. After completing his morning rituals, Naruto started towards training ground 7, his thoughts dwelling on his teammates. Both had seemed disappointed by being stuck on his team. If he was going to gain any traction with either of the beautiful kunoichi, he'd have to step up his game. He didn't want to be a burden. Maybe he'd get Kiba to show him some taijutsu stuff later on. Though the idea left a sour taste in his mouth, and he knew that the Inazaka would tease him mercilessly, he also knew that Kiba could and would give him some helpful pointers. Not surprisingly, Naruto was the last genin to arrive at the bridge leading to training ground 7. Both kunoichi were unerringly punctual, which was probably the only thing they had in common. Their Jonin sensei didn't seem to share the trait, since he was conspicuously absent. Naruto had the distinct impression that the Jonin's tardiness would be an ongoing issue, and he should plan on dealing with it. Neither girl seemed to acknowledge the blonde genin's arrival, which suited the blonde just fine. He perched himself on one of the railings and pulled out his best kunai, balancing the weapon on the tip of his finger, and settled in for a long wait. 2 hours, and a new kunai balancing record of 11 minutes and 12 seconds later, all three genin jumped as a friendly voice called out from beyond the bridge. "Yo. Sorry I'm late, but a little girl had lost her way. I had to help her get home. I'm sure you understand." Sakura opened her mouth, no doubt about to rail against her sensei's poor excuse for being late, but seemed to catch herself. "Alright, my cute little genin, today I have a special test for you. I call it the bell test. All you have to do is get one of these 2 bells by lunch and you pass. If you don't get a bell, then you fail and get shipped up to the Shinobi Corps." Kakashi gave the genin one of his eye smiles and held up a pair of bells. "Sensei, there are only 2 bells and 3 of us. Does that mean that someone is guaranteed to fail?" Sakura asked, worry evident in her tone. Naruto was stunned. He hadn't even noticed that there weren't enough bells for everyone. Something about the whole test was starting to nag at him. But he couldn't quite tell what it was. One thing he was sure of, however, was that it would be idiotic to take the test at face value. It would seem that way, wouldn't it? The masked Jonin quipped in reply. Naruto knew he was getting a hint, but the clue didn't help him divine the true nature of the test at all. He blamed it on skipping breakfast. He never could think on an empty stomach. Kakashi led them towards the middle of the training ground. The area was surrounded by a dense forest on 3 sides and a small lake on the 4th. 3 tall wooden posts stood proudly in the center of the clearing. To further sweeten the pot, whoever doesn't get a bell will also miss out on lunch. That person will be bound to one of these training posts and get to watch his or her teammates eat. And that's why he had to skip breakfast, Naruto though acidly. The Jonin gave the trio another eye smile. "You'll have to come at me with the intent to kill if you want to get a bell. Oh, and in case you were wondering, no one has ever passed this test." Ignoring the looks of shock on his genin's faces, Kakashi fixed the bells to his belt and pulled a timer from one of his many pockets. "You have 3 hours, starting now." Satsuki and Sakura immediately darted in opposite directions, leaving Naruto and Kakashi alone in the large clearing. Naruto glared at the Jonin, who seemed content to ignore him, pulling out a small orange book. "You've gotta be kidding me. Jonin or not, you can't expect to fight while reading." The blonde was getting angry. Not only had Kakashi given them an impossible test, but he'd lied about the test's true nature. Now the older ninja wasn't even taking the exam seriously. Kakashi favored the genin with a bored look. "I'll put it away if you can make me." "Fine. Shadow Clone Jutsu." Naruto yelled the name of his new favorite technique, his fingers crossed in the tiger seal. A dozen shadow clones poofed into existence within a cloud of smoke. All 12 clones shouted out an identical war cry and attacked Kakashi. The Jonin produced a kunai and started repelling the attacks, his eyes never leaving the pages of Ika Ika Paradise. Naruto was awestruck by the way moved, darting in and out of the clones, clumsy strikes, piercing them with his kunai. The Jonin never even had to block, content with sidestepping and ducking. The blonde knew that he had precious few seconds before Kakashi dispatched his 4 remaining clones. Rummaging through his hip pouch, he produced an explosive tag and carefully wrapped it around the handle of a kunai knife. Kakashi seemed unaware of his actions, the Jonin was still toying with his last 2 clones. Both shadow clones leapt at the older ninja simultaneously, and Naruto hurled the explosive kunai in sync with their attack. The resulting explosion was larger than the young genin had anticipated. The shock wave blew him off his feet and sent him hurtling through the air. He hit the ground hard and tumbled a few more feet before he finally managed to slow his momentum. He struggled to his knees as the smoke cleared, looking for any sign of his sensei. Naruto would be stunned if that explosion had so much as scratched Kakashi. He highly doubted that the masked ninja had won his position in a raffle. Leaf Village Secret Finger Jutsu, 1,000 Years of Death. Naruto's head whipped around as he heard Kakashi cry the name of some unknown jutsu. The blonde didn't have time to react as he saw the silver-haired ninja streaking towards him, his fingers locked into Ram Seal. Before this mysterious technique could connect, however, a black and blue blur intercepted the charging Jonin, halting his progress and forcing Kakashi to block a well-placed kick. Naruto watched in awe as Satsuki flipped over Kakashi's head, aiming a second kick to the back of the Jonin's cranium. The Jonin had no trouble dodging the kick, grabbing the dark-haired Kunoichi by the ankle and tossing her to the ground. Satsuki quickly recovered, rolling with her momentum, then flipping into a back handspring and sliding to her feet. She streaked forward, sliding low towards the Jonin's feet and aiming a mule kick towards her sensei's chest. Kakashi leaned back, letting her kick sail inches from his face, and grabbed her outstretched ankles. Naruto saw his opening. Kakashi was focused on Satsuki, giving him an opportunity to toss a pair of kunai towards the Jonin to cover his advance. The silver-haired ninja leaned out of the way to dodge them. One of the kunai was off the mark, however, missing wide right and grazing Satsuki's leg. Wincing, Naruto continued his advance and swung a looping haymaker at his sensei's skull, which Kakashi easily ducked. The Jonin allowed Naruto's momentum to flip the blonde genin over his shoulders, flipping Naruto heavily onto his back. "You're getting closer, Naruto, Satsuki, but you're still missing something. You'll have to try harder than that if you want to pass." The Jonin gave them a smile before casually tossing Satsuki towards the lake. Suddenly, Naruto got it. This test wasn't about getting the bells at all. Wheezing, Naruto clambered to his feet and circled around towards the lake shore where Asagi Satsuki was dragging herself out of the water. "What were you thinking, Dobi? You could have killed me. If you can't aim, don't throw weapons." Satsuki was angry, understandably so, though Naruto didn't think he'd ever seen her so incensed. Her dark eyes flashing, the Uchiha Saiyan pushed her dripping hair out of her face. Her cheeks were flushed, though Naruto couldn't tell if it was from anger or embarrassment. Probably both. "Satsuki, you don't understand. I'm pretty sure there's a secret to the test," Naruto whispered fervently. "Kakashi-sensei's been dropping hints the whole time, but I've been too dumb to see it until now." "You, dumb. I never thought you'd admit it. I can die a happy woman now," Satsuki quipped acidly, though she seemed at least partially interested in what Naruto had to say. Both genin looked to where Kakashi was standing. He was still in the middle of the clearing, his trashy porn book in hand. "Let's not talk about it here. Follow me, if you can." With that, Satsuki sprinted towards the woods, Naruto hot on her heels. Hey, wait up. Naruto had more than a little keeping up with Satsuki. He may have had a slight edge in terms of sheer physical strength, but the Uchiha Kunoichi was fast. She had him completely outclassed in speed, not that he'd ever admit it aloud. Then again, he didn't have to. Both genin knew who the superior ninja was. A few moments later, they were crouched in the branches of one of the giant trees that surrounded Konoha. Naruto was clutching his side, his breath coming in wheezing gasps. So, what's this bright idea? It'd better be good, Dobi, we're running out of time. Satsuki absent-mindedly fingered the Konoha headband tied loosely around her neck. Well, do you remember what Kakashi-sensei first told us yesterday? About how teamwork is the most important thing for a ninja? Naruto asked. Satsuki nodded, a look of comprehension crossing her pretty face. I think that the real test is to see if we can work together. Satsuki nodded. I think you're onto something. That's why there's only 2 bells. We're supposed to work as team, even though outside circumstances are trying to drive us apart. Kakashi-sensei said we were close, though neither of us got anywhere near the bells. If Sakura had been there, her voice trailed off. Speaking of Sakura, have you seen her? Satsuki shook her head. Well, we're gonna have to find her. I don't know if she can help us get the bells, though. She's never been that great at taijutsu. You're one to talk, Dobi. Hey, I finished pretty high up on the taijutsu portion. It was everything else that gave me trouble, Naruto defended, frowning. He'd been somewhat satisfied with his taijutsu performance during the final exam. The girl snorted. Only because you can take a beating really well. You take 5 or 6 blows for every one you dish out, but you somehow stay on your feet. Trust me, your taijutsu is as hopeless as the rest of you. Naruto glared at her, but he couldn't really argue the point. Well, maybe you could give me some pointers sometime, Naruto said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. If she was so great, then she'd have no trouble fixing his problems. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Let's just find Kiba's little girlfriend, shall we? Finding Sakura turned out to be a lot easier than either Satsuki or Naruto had suspected. All they had to do was follow her screams. Apparently, their new sensei grew bored of waiting and reading, and had decided to take the initiative. When the genin pair finally reached her, the pink-haired Kunoichi was curled into a fetal ball, crying. She kept muttering something that sounded suspiciously like, Kiba-kun, under her breath over and over. Smack. Snap out of it, Sakura. Whatever you saw was a genjutsu. Satsuki and Naruto's strained camaraderie faded as swiftly as it had appeared, and Satsuki settled back into Ice Princess mode. Sakura glared at her teammate, rubbing her reddening cheek. She seemed like she was about to start yelling at Satsuki, but Naruto quickly cut her off, explaining the true purpose of the bell test. Sakura agreed to work with them, but only after Satsuki acquiesced to giving up one of the bells if they were wrong. Naruto had offered, but Sakura was adamant that Satsuki be the one shipped off to the Shinobi Corps. The 2 Kunoichi glared daggers at each other, while Naruto stood nervously between them, all but forgotten. Locating their wayward sensei was easy. The Jonin had returned to the middle of the clearing, trashy book in hand. The 3 genin had taken up positions surrounding Kakashi, hidden in the dense forest. Well, the girls were hidden. Naruto couldn't find enough foliage to hide his neon orange jumpsuit. He reminded himself again that he needed to find some new clothes if he wanted to survive as a ninja. Shaking his head, the blonde focused on the mission. He was the point man. It was his job to get the Jonin's attention and keep it by any means possible. Here we go, Naruto thought, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. Pushing his fingers into the tiger seal, he shouted, Shadow Clone Jutsu. At the top of his voice, 3 dozen clones popped into existence in a large plume of smoke. Just as before, they all charged, their war cry echoing across the clearing. Kakashi didn't even look up as he began fighting them. This technique won't work, Naruto, the Jonin stated calmly, a hint of disappointment in his tone. Naruto leapt from his perch into battle, wincing as a kunai ended his last clone's brief, violent life. A hail of shuriken covered his advance, courtesy of Sakura, as Naruto engaged Kakashi in hand-to-hand combat. His clumsy, looping strikes never came close, but they didn't have to. Kakashi had seemingly failed to notice the 6 shadow clones that had hid themselves in the trees sneaking up behind him. They latched onto the Jonin's legs like giant ticks, holding the masked ninja in place. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. Satsuki's voice rang out over the clearing, which was Naruto's cue to withdraw. The kunoichi had leapt high into the air, and Kakashi's single visible eye widened as he saw the giant flaming ball of death arcing towards him. Producing a second kunai, the Jonin dropped his book, dispatching the clones holding him in place with blinding speed. As fast as he was, the silver-haired Jonin barely had time to leap out of the way before the fireball exploded, knocking Naruto off his feet. Naruto winced as he landed heavily on his back for the 3rd time, instantly regretting not getting further away from the fireball. How was he supposed to know that it exploded? The blonde barely noticed Satsuki and Sakura landing next him, kunai drawn. Satsuki heaved Naruto to his feet by the collar of his jumpsuit. The Jonin, meanwhile, rolled to his feet, one hand stretching despondently towards the blazing inferno. My book. You brats destroyed it. A wave of killer intent washed over the genin. Sakura was the first to buckle, falling to her knees at the sheer wrath emanating from their sensei. Satsuki had taken a couple steps back, her dark eyes wide with fear. Naruto was too tired to retreat and just consigned himself to his fate. Kakashi stalked toward them slowly as lightning streaked across the suddenly dark sky. You, the Jonin began, bringing his kunai to bear. Naruto was sure that his death would be as painful as it was quick. Pass. The 3 genin cautiously opened their eyes. The sky had returned to its normal blue, and Kakashi was giving them a one-eyed smile. Congratulations. You are now officially Team 7. Let's eat. The clearing was drowned in the sound of their cheers. Team 7 strolled away from their training ground in good spirits. Naruto was still grinning like a loon, Sakura was humming to herself, and Satsuki had a small smile on her face. Naruto was happier than he had been in a long time. After Team 7 had been the first team to ever pass the infamous bell test, the blonde genin somehow convinced the entire team to meet at Ichiraku Ramen. Kakashi said he'd meet them there, but Naruto had the feeling that the Jonin wouldn't arrive until much later, if he showed up at all. Naruto loved the simple ramen stand for a multitude of reasons, but mainly because the owner, Tuki, had never once been cold towards him. He and his daughter had never kicked him out of their restaurant or charged him double what the menu said, unlike many of their competitors. The Ichirakus were good people, and always made the young blonde feel welcome. Sometimes, the ramen stand felt more like home than the cold, empty apartment he slept in. When the group arrived at the restaurant, Naruto made his way over to his favorite stool at the bar. He always sat at the bar because he didn't want to make the pretty Ayame lug a dozen bowls to one of the tables. Tuki. Naruto called out. The older man looked up with wide smile. I'd like for you to meet my new team. This is Satsuki and Sakura. It's nice to meet you both, Tuki said politely, smiling at the girls. Naruto was so excited to get a genin team. You ladies watch out for him, will ya? We will, Tuki-san, Sakura said politely, surprised at how warm the restaurant owner seemed towards her new teammate. Most of the adults that she knew had always been distant with the blonde, no doubt due to the tactless pranks he'd pulled. I appreciate that. Now, what can I get for ya? After everyone had ordered, the three genin started talking about the bell test, then what type of training Kakashi would be giving them. Naruto was certain that their new sensei would teach them all kinds of awesome jutsu, while Sakura argued that their sensei would probably try to improve their teamwork and chakra control first. Apparently she had read that those were the first things that pretty much every Jonin sensei taught a new team. Satsuki didn't feel the need to join the conversation, but seemed content to watch her teammates argue back and forth. After everyone had their fill, some more than others, Sakura took off, claiming that her parents would worry if she didn't get back home soon, and leaving Naruto and Satsuki alone in the middle of the street. Naruto tried not to let the moment get awkward, but he didn't really know what to say. Do you ever wonder what it's like? Naruto blurted, breaking the silence. Satsuki arched a brow and started walking down the street, her long hair sashaying behind her. The blonde jogged to catch up. After another sufficiently awkward silence, Naruto tried again. I meant that I wonder what it's like, sometimes, ya know. To have someone worry about me if I came late. Satsuki's dark eyes softened a little, before her mouth pursed into a hard line. It's annoying, she said, her eyes flashing dangerously. They always nag you, telling you what to do. There's a million different rules and you don't have a say in any of them. I'm not a big fan of rules, Naruto began, but Satsuki cut him off. You don't realize how much you rely on those rules until no one's around to enforce them. Parents are like a safety net. As long as they're around, you have someone to pick up the pieces if you fail. You have someone to celebrate with when you succeed. You have expectations to live up to. They drive you to be better. Naruto didn't think that Satsuki was really talking to him anymore. Instead, she seemed to be thinking aloud. When they're gone, you feel lost. The ebony-haired genin turned to her teammate. If you ever find someone who makes you feel like that, don't ever let them go. You never know when they'll be torn from you. Naruto nodded, resolving to go talk to Iruka-sensei at the earliest possibility. He wouldn't make the mistake of taking the Chunin's friendship for granted. I don't know what it's like to have never known your family, Satsuki continued, favoring him with a pitying glance. But I'm willing to bet that losing everyone you ever cared about is much worse. To know love, then lose it all. I can't think of a worse fate. Naruto silently disagreed. To be hated by an entire village, with no one around who gave a damn, was a far worse fate. Having to endure their cold glares, the whispering behind their hands was at times unbearable. Thankfully, Naruto eventually found Iruka, Shika, Choji, and to lesser extent, Kiba. However, in Naruto's opinion, there was one thing that was worst of all: being alone. It was something that he and Satsuki had in common. While Satsuki was relatively popular in class, she kept everyone at arm's length, which offended a lot of people. The girls didn't like her because she wasn't into gossiping and boys, while the boys were too busy trying to impress her to get to know her. Meanwhile, Naruto had his circle of friends during school hours. Occasionally, Shikamaru and Choji would stop by his house after school, but for the most part, once class let out, Naruto came home to an empty apartment. A lot of his evenings were spent wandering the village. While the villagers' icy stares were bad, they were better than the crushing loneliness that pervaded his apartment. He suspected that same loneliness filled Satsuki's home, as well. Satsuki stopped in front of a large apartment complex. It was fancy, obviously way more expensive than the slum that Naruto lived in. Good night, Naruto. Thanks for walking me home. She was about to say something more, but decided against it. Naruto watched her enter the building and disappear. Line break. Team 7 trudged through town after completing their first week of D-rank missions. Naruto and Satsuki had both been extremely upset that they would be expected to do menial labor, though for vastly different reasons. Naruto had been naively expecting a quest to save a princess from a dastardly usurper king, so cleaning up dog poop and washing windows were a huge letdown. Satsuki, meanwhile, insisted that collecting trash was beneath her. She was the last scion of the Uchiha clan, not a garbage man. Even worse, Kakashi had forbidden Naruto from using his shadow clones to do the work. How else will you learn? Sakura, meanwhile, didn't seem to care. She took the D ranks in stride, humming throughout the day and chatting Naruto's ears off about her boyfriend. Naruto was learning more about his rival than he had ever wanted to know. Imagining the Inazaka kissing techniques was the last thing he wanted. Before they became a team, she wouldn't have given the blonde the time of day, but apparently she needed an outlet for her gossip, and Naruto was apparently the best option available. Satsuki seemed thankful that the Rosette hadn't chosen her to confide in. Nevertheless, the missions had all been successful, and Naruto had happily stuffed his hard-earned cash into Gama-chan, his faithful frog-shaped wallet. However, he didn't plan on keeping the frog stuffed full for long. Today was the day that he could afford a new wardrobe. Loath as was to give up his jumpsuits, he knew that they'd soon be taking on missions outside the village, missions that might require him to not be so easily noticed. He knew he wanted to keep some orange, as it was still his favorite color, but he had resigned himself to a more toned-down version. If only he had enough money to get some new kunai, too. He had never cared for shuriken too much, preferring the weight and feel of the larger kunai knives. Besides, a kunai was more versatile. It was effective at both close combat and at range. Lost in thought, Naruto made an excuse to his female teammates and bid them good night, ducking into a ninja apparel store. Sakura had seemed surprised, but followed him inside, while Satsuki kept walking without a single comment. What are you doing, Sakura? Naruto asked, confused. He hadn't expected company on this little shopping venture. The girl scoffed. If you're going to go clothes shopping, you'll need me along, the kunoichi quipped, a wide smile on her face as she started rummaging through the racks. If only Ino were here, we'd get you set up really well, but I can handle this on my own. Besides, I know the owner. She's friends with my mom, so I can get you a sweet deal. That was a relief, if Naruto was being honest with himself. He didn't think the shopkeep would dare throw him out if he had Sakura with him. The villagers may be cruel to him, but they were careful to not be too prejudiced around Konoha's kids for some unknown reason. The blonde had initially hoped that people would start treating him differently once he graduated from the academy, but sadly that had not been the case. If anything, the villagers treated him worse, like he was an explosive tag just waiting to go off. Naruto didn't find it bothering him quite so much anymore, though. He had Iruka-sensei, Choji and Shika to help keep him grounded, and now he had Satsuki and Sakura, too. His circle of friends was slowly but surely growing. Naruto felt a hard, but pleasant, lump in his chest at the thought. It was the same feeling he had gotten when Iruka said he was proud of him. Iruka was equal parts father figure, older brother, and teacher to the young genin. Naruto didn't think that sensei didn't quite cover how important the scarred chunin was to him, but he couldn't think of a more appropriate term. Kakashi sensei was cool, too, but in a much more distant way than Iruka. The Jonin would often offer Naruto good advice on any number of subjects, though they were usually just about Naruto's skills as a ninja and training methods. Iruka, on the other hand, had a lot of wisdom about life in general, and always knew what to say to cheer Naruto up whenever he found himself in a funk. Watching Sakura happily start pulling clothes off the rack, Naruto's thoughts drifted towards their absent teammate. She had been distant lately, even more than usual. It had started the day after he had walked her home. He suspected that Satsuki had shared more than she had intended, and now felt uncomfortable around him. Naruto shrugged the problem away. There was nothing he could do about it, so he shifted those troublesome thoughts to the back of his mind, instead focusing on helping Sakura pick out the perfect outfit. He knew he'd have a fight on his hands to keep his favorite color in the mix. The next morning, Naruto was the first one to the bridge off of Training Ground 7. The bridge had become the unofficial meeting place for the team, and the blonde immediately took his usual perch atop one of the railings. The blonde felt like a million ryo. He and Sakura had spent over 2 hours selecting new clothes. Ino Yamanaka, Sakura's closest friend, had shown up halfway through, causing the whole process to start over again. Naruto had no idea how the fellow blonde had known that there was clothes shopping being done, but being the center of attention to two beautiful kunoichi had been a novel and pleasant experience. He felt cool for the first time in his young life. He was wearing a sleeveless hooded sweatshirt, navy blue with a burnt orange trim around the hood and pockets. He had labored for an hour after getting home to sew the Uzumaki swirl on the back. He wore the hood down and the zipper half undone, revealing the black short-sleeved undershirt beneath. The undershirt's sleeves and collar were trimmed in same burnt orange as the jacket. His forearms and shins were hidden by navy blue warmers, once again trimmed in orange, while a pair of black knee-length shorts, with orange piping down the side, rounded out the ensemble. A pair of black ninja sandals protected his feet. He'd purchased a new headband, a full foot longer than his old one, but had made sure that the lady behind the counter had attached Uruka's leaf plate to it. He didn't want to completely do away with his mentor's gift, after all. Even better, thanks to Sakura's sweet deal with the owner, he'd been able to buy a new kunai set. It wasn't anything fancy, but the knives were leagues better than his old ones. Both Sakura and Ino had judged him acceptable, and the blonde girl had even flirted with him a bit. She'd teased him gently when he'd blushed redder than he though possible. Sakura had rolled her eyes at the entire affair, muttering about how shallow her friend was. Line break. Satsuki and Sakura walked towards the bridge in silence. The kunoichi still didn't care for one another, but they happened to be coming from the same direction and going to the same place at the same time. Satsuki couldn't tell what Sakura's deal was. The rosette seemed especially excited to get to the bridge today, and kept shooting her knowing looks. Satsuki was almost tempted into asking Sakura what was going on, but she had no doubt that that was Sakura's intentions. The Uchiha Saiyan refused to play along with her teammates' immature game. She was utterly stunned upon seeing that Naruto was already there. He was normally the last to arrive, but he was calmly sitting atop the bridge's railing balancing one of those stupid kunai on his finger. What really drew her attention, though, was that the blonde genin had traded in his horrible jumpsuit. She felt her cheeks start to redden as she ogled her teammate, and immediately fought to keep down the blush. She'd never realized that Naruto was, well, hot. Who knew that he was hiding such well-developed muscles beneath that bulky jumpsuit? It seemed as if the blonde hadn't realized that the girls had arrived, or that Satsuki was still blatantly ogling him. Instead, his cerulean gaze was focused on the kunai that he was lazily balancing on one finger. Satsuki tried to look away, but her onyx eyes kept shifting back towards him of their own accord. Keep your cool, girl. No matter how hot he is, he's still just a doby. Sakura giggled beside her, and Satsuki fixed her with her hardest glare, though the effect was somewhat tarnished by the blush still staining her cheeks. The giggle also drew Naruto's attention, and his eyes locked with Satsuki's for a brief moment. Her blush deepened, and she looked away, disgusted with her body's physical reaction. She was a kunoichi, not a bitch in heat. Looking good, Naruto. Sakura squealed, sidling next to him. Ino and I are miracle workers, I swear. If I wasn't in love with Kiba-kun, I might just make you take me out sometime. The blonde blushed furiously at the teasing, and his lack of focus caused his kunai to clatter loudly to Bridge's surface. Satsuki almost wretched, imagining Naruto and Sakura together was a new personal hell for her. Not that she'd be jealous, she told herself. It'd just be really annoying to watch them hang all over each other. She silently thanked Kami that Sakura already had a boyfriend. Fortunately, Kakashi chose that moment to show up. If he noticed Naruto's new gear, he didn't show it. Yo. Sorry I'm late. I had to help a baby bird with broken wing get back to its nest. I'm sure you understand. Satsuki rolled her eyes. Their sensei's excuses were getting lamer by the day. Line break. Naruto retrieved his fallen kunai and slid it back into his hip pouch. He was pretty surprised that Kakashi was only a few minutes late today, though the Jonin's tardiness rarely followed an established pattern. Sometimes, he'd show up 20 minutes after 7, other times he wouldn't arrive till almost 10. It was maddening. Naruto couldn't anticipate when he'd have to show up to the bridge, so catching an extra hour of sleep was impossible. He suspected that it was an intentional ploy on Kakashi's part. He hoped that they were doing something cool today. D-ranked missions were good for Gamma-chan, but they were especially hard on Naruto's pride. Scrubbing dog crap out of the Inazaka kennels while Kiba watched had easily been one of the most degrading moments of his young shinobi career. Kiba had teased him the whole time, pointing out whenever Naruto missed a pile. It didn't help that Akamaru, Kiba's familiar, had given Naruto a fresh pile to clean up halfway through. He knew that the larger boy was just giving him a hard time, but he'd had to do whole mission basically by himself. Satsuki outright refused, while Sakura seemed more focused on her boyfriend than the kennels. Kakashi led the 3 genin into the large clearing of Training Ground 7. Naruto and Sakura shared an excited look. Normally, the Jonin took them to the Hokage Tower to get a mission. Going to the training ground meant they would be learning something. While Satsuki and Naruto were far more interested in learning new techniques than Sakura, even the Rosette was grateful for a break from D-ranked missions. Satsuki usually stuck around for an extra hour or two after Kakashi dismissed them for the day, beating on the training posts, while Naruto stayed late into the evening, punching and kicking until his knuckles were bloody and his shins were numb. If he was being completely truthful with himself, he didn't really know what he was doing. He knew how to throw a punch, but he was sure that if he could get the forms right that he'd hit a hell of a lot harder. It was just so difficult for him to learn from the complicated scrolls that Iruka had given him. The older Chunin had looked sincerely apologetic when Naruto had gone to him for help with his taijutsu forms, but Iruka had claimed that his workload had doubled since Mizuki had turned traitor. The increased strain on the Chunin's time wouldn't be relieved until a new instructor was found to replace him. Until then, Naruto would be on his own. Iruka had ruffled Naruto's shaggy blonde hair and promised that he would help his student as soon as he could, if only Naruto would hang in there in the meantime. Alright, my adorable little genin, today we're going to warm up with some sparring. Afterwards, I'm going to teach you all a cool new trick. Kakashi immediately caught all 3 genin's attention. What are you going to show us? Some bad new jutsu? Naruto could barely contain his excitement, and had inadvertently started shouting. Kakashi sighed. It's always jutsu with you, he muttered under his breath. It's not a jutsu, Naruto, but I guarantee that it's vital to being a good ninja. The blonde was slightly disappointed, but quickly shook it off. Learning something was better than nothing, after all. First off, we'll have Naruto face Sakura. Taijutsu only. Start and stop on my mark. Naruto and Sakura nodded and faced each other, while Satsuki perched herself atop one of the tall training stumps. Honestly, Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to fight Sakura. Sparring with her was different from sparring with Satsuki. The Uchiha was a fighter, the best in their age group. Satsuki was more of a girl in Naruto's head. Start. Sakura immediately hopped backwards, settling into a defensive posture. Naruto stood his ground, lowering into his stance and cursing his misfortune. It was bad enough that he had to fight a girl, but did he have to be the aggressor, too? To quote Shika, "This is troublesome," Naruto thought, sighing aloud. Tensing, he charged towards the rosette, half-heartedly throwing a wide, looping haymaker that he knew she could dodge. Sure enough, Sakura neatly ducked beneath the blow, but instead of pressing her advantage, she merely backpedaled a few steps and resumed her defensive stance. This is going to get annoying really fast, Naruto thought acidly. He charged again, throwing the exact same punch with the exact same result. At this rate, we'll be here for hours. Fine, I guess I'm going to have to be a jerk and hit a girl. Hopefully Kiba won't kick me too hard for beating up his girlfriend. Naruto charged a third time, faking another right-handed haymaker before spinning into a low leg sweep. The kick caught Sakura by surprise, and she squawked as she felt her legs fly out from under her, landing on her rear. She rolled backwards, regaining her feet before charging Naruto, her emerald eyes flashing in anger and embarrassment. Her punches and kicks were crisp and accurate, but weak. Naruto was easily able to block or absorb all of them without any trouble. Leaning sideways to dodge a punch to his face, he grabbed the offending appendage and pulled the rosette towards him. She tried to yank her arm free, but his superior strength won out, and Naruto was able to force her into a rather painful arm lock. He didn't normally use submission holds in his taijutsu, but he figured that the arm bar would be better than just pummeling her face in. Regardless, she cried out in pain, and Naruto was about to let go before Kakashi's voice rang out. "Stop. That's enough." Naruto immediately released his teammate, and she shot him a slightly hurt look as she rubbed the pain away from her elbow. Kakashi stepped before them, drawing their attention. "Sakura, your technique is good, though your physical conditioning leaves a lot to be desired. Have you been training?" Sakura shook her head. "Start training. Physical fitness helps more than just your speed and strength. The better shape you're in, the more chakra you'll have at your disposal." Sakura muttered a response, but none of the others were able to make out what she had said. "I'm sorry, Sakura, but you'll have to speak up." The girl blushed furiously. "Kiba-kun doesn't like girls that are too muscular." Satsuki laughed from her perch atop the training posts. Kakashi shot the raven-haired girl a dangerous look, silencing her, before turning back to Sakura. "This isn't a game. Do you want to die in the field?" Sakura shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "Then do as I tell you. I don't care what Kiba-kun likes. I care about keeping you alive. Do you understand?" Sakura nodded, blinking away her tears and staring at her feet. Kakashi's voice softened as he continued. "Good. If you have any questions about training methods or fitness regimens, you can always come to me." And Sakura, he lifted her chin to meet her gaze. "If he truly cares about you, he won't care how many muscles you have." He left the girl to ponder that tidbit of wisdom before turning towards his only male student. "Naruto, your condition is excellent. I assume you've been training." The blonde nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Good. Keep it up. It was smart to use your superior strength to overpower your opponent. However, Whoever showed you how to fight obviously didn't know what he was doing. Most enemies would have been able to break out of that arm bar with ease. Naruto's face fell. You need to work on your technique. Start with the basics, don't just hit the stumps. You need to master the katas forms. Your punches should be as crisp as Sakura's. If you need help getting started, let me know. Naruto almost facepalmed. He'd never thought to ask Kakashi for help, which, looking back, was really dumb on his part. Kakashi turned to Satsuki. Satsuki, you're up next against Naruto. Same rules as before. She nodded, leaping down from the training stump and taking Sakura's place. Ready, start. Satsuki immediately charged Naruto with blinding speed. He barely had time to block the leaping roundhouse kick, but she'd already landed, spinning around and nailing him across the face with a backhanded fist. He absorbed the blow, biting his cheek painfully, and tried to grab her like he'd done with Sakura, but she darted backwards out of range. Smirking, she lunged again, this time with a flurry of punches and kicks. He was able to block half of them and dodge a couple more, but had to eat a fist to the jaw. Before he could recover, Satsuki knocked the wind out of him, courtesy of a sharp knee to his solar plexus. The blonde doubled over and winced, expecting a follow-up strike that never came. Satsuki seemed content to give him time to recover, examining the nails on her left hand with a bored look on her face. Ready for more, Dobi? Satsuki smirked when Naruto finally regained his breath. Don't get cocky, he griped in return. What an intimidating comeback. I'm quivering in my sandals. Her dark eyes danced with mirth and she flipped her ponytail over one shoulder. Come on then, Dobi, show me what you've got. It was Naruto's turn to go on the offensive. With a loud battle cry, he charged his kunoichi teammate, throwing a series of punches and kicks. None of them even came close to landing. Dear Kami, are you always this predictable, Dobi? A civilian could beat you up. Stop calling me that, Naruto snarled, his temper flaring. Why would I? She smirked again. That's what you are. I'm just being honest with you, Dobi. Naruto roared again, sprinting towards her. She raised her arms to defend herself, ready for another set of sloppy attacks. Instead of throwing a punch or kick, however, the blonde barreled into her, tackling her to the ground. They grappled back and forth, rolling in the grass as each tried to gain the upper hand. Finally, Naruto was able to roll her onto her back. Grasping both of her wrists, he forced her arms up and away from her body so she couldn't get any leverage. He rested the bulk of his weight on her slim waist so she wasn't able to kick free. I win, he gloated, grinning like a loon. Who's the Dobi now? You are, she replied acidly, her onyx eyes meeting her cerulean gaze. In that moment, Naruto briefly forgot where he was. Kami. Her eyes are pretty. I think I could just lose myself in them forever. She gazed up at him through lowered lashes. Satsuki seemed to recover first. Get off of me, Dobi. Her sudden shout snapped Naruto out of his trance, suddenly realizing the compromising position they were in. His eyes bulged. Satsuki was a girl, and he was straddling her while pinning her arms above her head. I said, get off. Naruto quickly complied. Blushing, both genin gained their feet and faced their sensei, who looked halfway between amused and exasperated. Sakura was staring at them, her green eyes dancing with hidden mirth. Naruto had no doubt that he'd just become a juicy piece of gossip. Done with your little groping session? Kakashi chuckled, causing the pair to blush again. Naruto, same notes as before. You have a lot of physical talent, but you need to go back to the basics. Nice. Improvisation to subdue your opponent. Naruto didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. Satsuki, you did extremely well. Your technique was flawless and your speed was excellent. Your strikes didn't pack as much power as they could have, but that's something you'll likely be fighting your entire career. As it is, your strength is above average for your age and gender. However, I'd recommend you avoid grappling at all costs. Most of your opponents will be like Naruto. They'll try to physically overpower you, and you can't afford to fight on their terms. Many kunoichi employ weapons instead of relying solely on taijutsu for just that reason. As you mature, you may want to consider picking up some kenjutsu. Yes, Kakashi-sensei. Good. Now, since you've all been good little genin and danced for my amusement, I'm going to teach you a new skill. Naruto blinked in surprise. Sensei, aren't Satsuki and Sakura going to spar? The Jonin shook his head. There's no point. Satsuki and Sakura know what they need to improve. As I was saying, it's time to learn a new technique. Today, we're climbing trees, he said grandly. He looked at his students' blank faces before continuing. Without using our hands. Line break. The tree climbing exercise had been especially difficult for Naruto. The problem, Kakashi had told him, lay with his enormous chakra reserves. While most genin could feel the very slight drain on their chakra that the exercise required, for Naruto it was like isolating an eyedropper of water from the ocean. No matter how little chakra he tried to employ, he found himself propelled forcefully from his tree. It took him almost a week of constant training, of trial after trial, error after error, for him to gauge the exact amount of chakra required to stick to the tree without launching himself through the air. He still could only take a handful of steps before his tenuous control ran out, expelling him from the tree like a rocket. However, his ungodly chakra pool would cause far more problems than just the tree climbing exercise. He'd have to use the same system for all of his jutsu to get the best effect, barring, of course, the shadow clone jutsu. He could pump as much chakra as he wanted into his signature technique and only end up with more clones. Furthermore, Kakashi told him that the jutsu required a boatload of chakra, more than most shunin were able to produce without killing themselves, to even produce one clone. That's why he could use the move so much better than his other ones. He could actually feel it, though only slightly. His other jutsu, like substitution, henge, and the regular clone jutsu would have limited effectiveness or outright fail if he pushed too much chakra into them. A small part of the blonde was tempted to just forget those techniques and focus on mastering jutsu that required more chakra, but he knew that he needed them. There was a reason that they were taught to every single student that went through the academy, after all. Further adding to his list of woes, his outlandishly large chakra pool would also make him highly susceptible to genjutsu. Illusory techniques worked by influencing an opponent's chakra network, and Naruto was unlikely to notice the subtle manipulations until it was far too late, if at all. Furthermore, even if he did realize he was in a genjutsu, he would have extreme difficulty escaping the hostile illusion. Dispelling genjutsu was as simple as momentarily disrupting your chakra flow. For most ninja, this was a relatively easy task, like clogging a small stream. For Naruto, it would be like damming a wide, raging river. However, if Naruto was able to overcome these obstacles, Kakashi told him he'd be a force to be reckoned with. His chakra reserves, which had so far caused him so much trouble, would enable him to keep fighting long after anyone else fainted from chakra exhaustion. He could potentially learn any high-level jutsu, barring genjutsu, of course, and use them much more frequently than anyone else. After a lot of thought, Naruto decided to look at the whole thing like it was a blessing. He could learn to deal with chakra control problems. It would be difficult to master manipulating such minuscule amounts of chakra, but it was far from impossible. Line break. Kakashi Hatake had tried not to show it during the day's training, but Naruto's chakra pool had deeply unsettled him. Even considering his lineage and tenet, there was no way that the boy should have so much chakra. The Jonin made his way towards the Hokage tower. Despite his usual apathy, Kakashi felt that this disturbing development couldn't wait. Anything regarding the Kyuubi needed to be a top priority. He checked in with the Hokage's secretary, a cute brunette who favored him with what she obviously though was a seductive smile. He briefly considered taking the Chunin home with him when he left, but ultimately decided against it. Women like that tended to want more than he was willing to give. The young woman announced that the Hokage was ready to see him, and he passed by her without another glance nor thought. Kakashi. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Hiruzen Sarutobi, known to the world as the Sandaime Hokage, was obviously advancing in years. His face was covered with a web of wrinkles, and his voice had the hoarse quality of a man who had lived long and laughed often. Many shinobi didn't live to reach the Hokage's age. It was a testament to his skill and knowledge that he had survived as long as he had. Hokage-sama, it's about Naruto and his burden, Kakashi replied solemnly, cutting straight to the point. The Sandaime sobered immediately, his easy smile wiped from his face in an instant. Tell me everything, the older man ordered. Honestly, I don't know, the Jonin replied. His chakra pool is frankly terrifying. I've had them working on the tree climbing exercise for a week, and he still hasn't mastered it. Sarutobi nodded, packing his pipe. That's to be expected, though. Chakra control was never going to be the boy's strong suit. Kakashi shook his head. I didn't expect it to be this much of a problem. I've watched him go at it for hours, using as little chakra as he can, and he still can barely take half a dozen steps up the tree without launching himself 20 feet through the air. The Sandaime frowned as he lit his pipe, taking a puff of the bittersweet tobacco within. That does sound troubling. Kakashi continued airing his concerns. I had him channel as much chakra as he could for me, Hokage-sama, and he did something I've never even heard of before. I could see it roiling off of him in waves. What did it look like? The Hokage asked, concern written across his face. Was it bright blue? It wasn't the Kyuubi's chakra at all. I couldn't feel any malevolence from it, though the sheer amount almost overwhelmed me. I've never felt anything like it, even from you or the Yondaime at your primes. For a long moment, the Hokage puffed on his pipe, considering this startling revelation. Kakashi had been right to bring this to him. Very well. I'll recall Jiraiya to the village immediately. He's the only man I trust to examine young Naruto's seal. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Kakashi replied, visibly relieved. In the meantime, I need for you to do your utmost to help temper Naruto's chakra control. Perhaps the tree climbing exercise, while basic, is beyond him at the moment. Start with something more taxing on his reserves. As you command. Life couldn't get much better for young Naruto Uzumaki. After a full week of failure at the tree climbing exercise, Kakashi had moved him on to the supposedly more difficult water walking technique. It had been difficult, but he'd managed it after a few days. Even better, he'd gone back to the tree climbing exercise afterwards, and had finally gotten it down. Sure, it had only taken him another week, but after many trials and errors, he'd reached the top. Kakashi had quickly set him to practicing sticking a leaf to his forehead. He still struggled with that one, though after 2 weeks of training he stopped exploding the leaf into a million tiny pieces. He knew that he'd eventually get it down. Now, the blonde sat in his favorite stool in his favorite restaurant with 2 of his favorite people. He'd spotted Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino strolling through the village streets and had managed to get the 2 boys to agree to join him for some ramen. Ino, though she hadn't been invited, decided to tag along. Naruto had been a little hesitant about the idea, but he couldn't tell her to just bug off. So how's training going? Your sensei teaching you anything cool? Naruto asked Shika in between bowls. The pineapple-haired genin frowned. Not really. We usually just do a couple missions, then some teamwork exercises. After that, we go home. Why? Ino interrupted. What are you guys doing? I guess Satsuki and Sakura are doing pretty much what you guys are doing. After we did the water walking exercise, they kinda disappear while Kakashi helps me fix my taijutsu and work on chakra control. Water walking, Shikamaru echoed. It comes after the tree climbing one, Naruto explained. Choji perked up, joining the conversation. What tree climbing one? You know, where you climb using chakra on your feet and run up a tree. Naruto was confused. It had been almost a month since Kakashi-sensei had started them on that particular exercise. Noting his companion's blank stares, he continued, slightly confused. Haven't you guys done that yet? No, Ino said flatly. Like Shika said, we've just done stupid teamwork stuff. Weird, Naruto commented, feeling a little awkward. Choji let out a belch, causing Ino to shoot him a hard glare. Unperturbed, the large genin turned to Shikamaru. Do you think that Asuma-sensei expects us to learn that stuff from our parents? The smaller boy frowned. It's possible. Naruto, Satsuki, and Sakura don't have shinobi parents at home to help out with their training. Maybe that's why their sensei shows them more than Asuma-sensei does with us. Or maybe, Ino chimed in, her teal eyes flashing. Maybe Asuma-sensei is just being as lazy as you guys. I'm definitely going to ask him why we haven't done this so-called tree climbing exercise. Naruto scratched the back of his head. Shouldn't you have already heard all this from Sakura? Ino waved her hand dismissively. We don't talk about training when we hang out. What do you talk about? The blonde shot him a coy look. Wouldn't you like to know? She said suggestively, a smirk spreading across her pretty face. On second thought, I don't really want to know. If Naruto didn't know any better, he'd say Ino was flirting with him, but that was impossible, right? Your loss, Naruto-kun, Ino sighed. Yo, Naruto. Naruto turned towards the familiar voice calling behind him. Kakashi-sensei stood in the entrance of the small stand, one hand lifting up the flap that separated the restaurant from the rest of the village. Come with me. Sorry guys, I gotta go, Naruto said apologetically, reaching for Gama-chan. I'll catch you around, alright. We should do this again sometime. I'd absolutely love to. Naruto-kun, Ino said. Feel free to invite me again anytime. Sure. Naruto replied, not bothering to mention that he hadn't even invited her in the first place. Later Shika, Choji. After paying for his meal, Naruto followed his patient sensei out of Ichiraku's and down the street. They walked in silence for a few minutes, though eventually the blonde's curiosity got the better of him. Where are we going? Kakashi paused, as if he was looking for the right thing to say. We're headed for the Hokage's office. There's someone there you need to meet. Am I in trouble? Naruto asked, fear gripping his chest. He hadn't pulled any pranks since he'd become a genin, so whatever it was, he'd been framed. I swear I haven't done anything. No, you're not in trouble, Kakashi laughed, ruffling his student's hair. It's about your tenant and the seal keeping him at bay. Is something wrong? Kakashi sighed. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. Naruto nodded. He had a million more questions to ask, but he could tell that his sensei wasn't going to be any more forthcoming than he already had been. As irritating as it was, he'd have to wait. Thankfully, the walk from Ichiraku's to the Hokage's offices wasn't too long. He'd find out what all of this was about soon enough. When they arrived, the pretty brunette secretary ushered them in without delay, giving Naruto a small smile. Naruto returned with a foxy grin. She was one of the few people who was always nice to him whenever he visited the Hokage. Her predecessor, a boring man with cropped dark hair, had been a lot less accommodating. Gigi. Naruto shouted as he entered the office. How's it going? The blonde plopped himself in his customary chair. Are you ready to give me that hat, yet? Not yet, Naruto, the Sandame replied, favoring the boy with a smile. I'm doing well, thank you for asking. How about you? How's your training going? Really well. I finally got the tree thing down, and I'm working on sticking a leaf to my forehead. That's good to hear, the Hokage replied absently, packing his pipe. Kakashi tells me you've been working very hard. I'm glad that you're finally taking your training more seriously. Naruto blushed, pleased with the praise and slightly embarrassed that he hadn't worked this hard while in the academy. The old man finished packing the tobacco, lighting it before continuing. As much as I would like to spend the afternoon exchanging courtesies, my boy, we have some important matters to discuss. I'd like for you to meet a student of mine, Jiraiya. The Sandame gestured towards the back of the room. Seeing this Jiraiya for the first time, Naruto was more than a little embarrassed that he hadn't noticed him when he'd entered the room. First of all, the man was huge, towering over everyone else in the room by at least half a foot. Secondly, he was exuberantly and outlandishly dressed, all in bright reds with an enormous scroll strapped to his back. Instead of the customary Konoha headband, Jiraiya wore a horned headband with the kanji for oil on it. He also had long, wild, snow-white hair. Nice to meet you, Jiraiya-sama, Naruto said politely. Even though he wasn't as good as Satsuki or Sakura at village history, he knew right away who this man was. This was Jiraiya of the Sannin, the man who had trained the Yondaime Hokage. The big man gave him a small wave before nodding towards the Hokage. Naruto turned back towards the Sandame. The old man puffed on his pipe for a moment before speaking again. I've asked Jiraiya here because he's the elemental nation's leading expert of Fuinjutsu. The blonde genin suspected that he was supposed to be impressed, but he had no idea what Fuinjutsu even was. Kakashi noted his student's confusion. Seals, Naruto. Fuinjutsu is the study of seals. You should be interested in learning about them. The Uzumakis were known and feared for their expertise in the field. It's why Kumo all but destroyed the clan during the Second Shinobi War. They wiped out the entirety of Uzushiogakure just to do it. Naruto tried to process this information. He'd never really given much thought to his family name. He knew that his parents had died during the Kyuubi attack and desperately wanted to find out who they were, but he'd never considered that he might have had a clan, or that he'd be one of its last surviving members. He suddenly felt a deep anger settle over him. Kumogakure was almost directly responsible for him growing up alone. If they hadn't destroyed the clan, there surely would have been someone from his family willing to take him in. He suddenly felt so alone. He had no clan and no parents. This must be how Satsuki feels, Naruto thought with a flash of insight. So my clan was from this Uzushio. Kakashi nodded. Can I go there? The question seemed to take the three older ninja by surprise. Naruto, the Hokage said, his voice filled with sorrow. The village is nothing but ruins now. You are needed here. I promise that you can visit your ancestral home at a later date, but for now I ask for your patience. Naruto's face fell. I know how much family means to you, my boy, and I will keep my promise. You have my word. Naruto wiped at his eyes, suddenly filled with determination. Well, I guess until then I'll have to learn all I can about Fuinjutsu. If that's what my clan is known for, then I want to do them proud. I can help you there, kid, Jiraiya said, smiling. It was the first time he'd spoken since Naruto entered the room, and it was a lot deeper than Naruto expected. For some reason, He couldn't help but like the Sannin. I know a few things about the subject, after all. Kakashi shot the Sannin an annoyed look, one that the older ninja didn't miss. Don't worry, Kakashi, I'm not stealing your student. I'll just show him a few things here and there about seals in his free time. The Jonin still looked irritated. Aren't you leaving the village again soon? I'd hate for you to get Naruto's hopes up and then disappear in a few days. Nah, I think I'm going to stick around for a while. It'll give me a chance to remind myself what I'm fighting for. Besides, there are other issues that need to be taken care of. Jiraiya's final statement was loaded with obvious hidden meanings, though Naruto hadn't the slightest idea of what he meant. What other issues? Kakashi and the Sandaime didn't seem to have any problem deciphering the cryptic statement, though Naruto didn't feel quite bold enough to ask. However, there was another question that he'd been dying to get answered since he'd entered the room. It's really cool to meet Jiraiya-sama and all, but why am I here? I mean, I doubt that someone so important meets and greets every rookie genin in the village. The Hokage turned towards Naruto, and Genin realized for the first time just how old the Hokage was. His weathered face was creased with concern. Kakashi gave me a rather interesting report a couple weeks ago. Tell me, Naruto, have you ever suffered from chakra exhaustion? The blonde shook his head. I didn't think so, not with what Kakashi reported. What's going on? Naruto demanded, a sinking feeling burying itself deep in its gut. What did Sensei tell you? Kakashi looked to the Hokage, who nodded. Naruto, you have larger chakra reserves than anyone in the village, the Hokage included. You could combine the chakra pools of every shinobi in the village, and they still wouldn't come close to matching yours, Kakashi stated simply. I doubt there's anyone in all of the elemental nations who can rival them, even other Jinchuriki. That's a good thing, right? Naruto asked, not liking where the conversation was going. Jiraiya settled himself in the chair next to him, propping his feet on the Hokage's desk. It's like this, Gaki. You shouldn't have that much chakra. It's not natural. It shouldn't even be possible. We think it has something to do with the fuzzball inside of you, which is why the Sarutobi sensei asked me to come. I'm the only person loyal to Konoha who could even begin to comprehend the seal that the Yondaime used to stop the Nine Tails, much less make adjustments. So, you're worried that the seal is breaking? That's right, kid. You catch on quick. Now, do me a favor and take off your shirt. Naruto hesitated before complying. Now channel some chakra for me. How much? Jiraiya shrugged. As much as you want. It shouldn't matter. Nodding, Naruto closed his eyes and reached for the vast ocean that was his chakra reserves and started pumping the chakra through his network. Once he'd tapped into them, he couldn't help but keep reaching, pushing more and more chakra through his body. He'd only begun before a hand on his shoulder told him to stop. The teenager opened his eyes, noticing the slightly stunned look on the Sandaime's face. Jiraiya, on the other hand, didn't seem surprised in the slightest. It's as I suspected, sensei. Minato's seal work was even better than we could have hoped for even wanted. The big man turned back to the blonde, his hand still clasped on his shoulder. Congrats, kid. You're no longer a Jinchuriki. I'm sorry, what? Kakashi asked. It was strange to see his normally unflappable sensei at a loss for words. I can't say for certain, since the seal is all but disintegrated, but it looks like Minato added something to the seal that would leach the Kyuubi's chakra and add it to Naruto's reserves. The Kyuubi is a being of pure chakra. As Naruto grew, Minato's seal kicked into overdrive, siphoning off more and more of the beast's chakra until there was nothing left, effectively killing the Kyuubi. I didn't even consider doing that with Kushina's seal, for obvious reasons. Jiraiya leaned his head back, closing his eyes. Minato truly was one of a kind. I've never seen anyone just get fuinjutsu like he did. It was actually a little annoying. He'd understand in minutes concepts that took me days to learn. So the Kyuubi is gone for good? The Sandame asked, his face filled with conflicting emotions. I can't say for sure, but my best guess is no. It's an immortal demon, formed by people's baser emotions. It'll be back, but it's definitely something we needn't worry about in our lifetime, or even our grandchildren's lifetime. The legendary ninja stood. Well, now that that's out of the way, I'm going to go continue my research. My books don't write themselves, after all. He turned towards Naruto and tossed the genin a small, leather-bound book. Read that cover to cover. I'll find you when you're done. It has all the information you need to get started with Fuinjutsu. Naruto caught the book and looked at the cover. The Idiot's Guide to Fuinjutsu, by the legendary Jiraiya. He looked up to thank the Sannin, but noticed that the three older ninja were giving each other very weird looks. Silently recognizing that he was no longer needed, the blonde made his way through out of the office, closing the door behind him. This isn't good, Kakashi said moment the door latched behind his student. I can't believe that sensei was so irresponsible. I understand how difficult it must have been for him to force his own son to become a Jinchuriki, but this is too far. The Jonin knew that Jinchuriki were the weapons of mass destruction in the shinobi arms race. Every major village contained at least one, with the exception of Iowa, who'd lost theirs to Kumo long ago. Konoha losing their Jinchuriki was a big deal. If any of the other villages found out that Naruto no longer contained the Kyuubi, all-out war could shortly follow. At the very least, Konoha would lose its standing as the most powerful hidden village of the elemental nations. It may not be quite so bad, the Sandame replied, refilling his pipe. The boy does still hold the Kyuubi's chakra. Not really, Jiraiya argued, taking Kakashi's side. While Naruto may hold as much chakra as the Kyuubi once did, it's still just normal chakra. It won't give the special abilities afforded to Jinchuriki. The Sannin had gone toe-to-toe with a Jinchuriki in the past, and it had been a harrowing experience. The man had powers that Jiraiya had never dreamed of, and though the Sannin had won the day, it had been a very close thing. It also won't come with any of the weaknesses, like mental instability. Also, that chakra is firmly under Naruto's command. He doesn't have to barter with a malevolent demon in order to use it. The Sandame was taking this way too calmly for Kakashi's tastes. Naruto still barely knows how to use all that chakra. He can barely control it. He doesn't have the skill to wield it properly, and won't for a long time. I hate to say it, but he's not exactly the fastest learner I've ever taught. The same would be true if all of that chakra still belonged to the Kyuubi, Sarutobi said, puffing on his pipe. He gave Kakashi and Jiraiya a hard look. We can't change what has happened, only how we move forward from it. It's up to the both of you to train Naruto into the warrior this village needs. If we don't have a Jinchuriki, we'll have to settle for a second coming of the Yellow Flash. Kami knows that the boy has the chakra for it. A few days later, Team 7 finished their assigned D-rank mission, cleaning out the village's stables, and collected their pay. Good work, team. No extra training today. We'll meet up at the same time tomorrow, alright? The genin nodded, and the trio turned to walk away. Naruto, stay behind for a minute. There's something I want to talk to you about. Naruto nodded at his teammates, who had halted their departure, too. The girls left without a word, though Sakura gave him a small wave farewell. As Naruto watched them leave, his heart sank. He had a feeling that whatever his sensei wanted to talk about couldn't be good. Walk with me, Kakashi demanded. Naruto complied, and the pair strolled down the empty Konoha streets. Naruto preferred the village in the hours just before darkness truly settled. There were fewer people to glare at him. The Hokage monument served as an impressive background, visible even against the dusky sky. Tell me, Naruto, Kakashi said out of the blue as they rounded a corner. Do you know why we generally work in four-man teams? The teen nodded, happy that he knew the answer for once. It's supposed to be the perfect size for infiltration. It's large enough that a team should be able to handle any situation, while small enough to remain unnoticed. Kakashi gave him a trademarked eye smile. Very good. There's another reason behind it, though. A four-man team is perfect for assassinating a single opponent. They have the advantage of numbers, and are able to surround and overwhelm the target without getting in each other's way. I'm sure you've noticed that your shadow clones tend to reduce each other's effectiveness. Yeah, but if I make enough of them, they get the job done. Naruto was slightly peeved at the attack on his favorite jutsu. That's my point, Naruto. You have an unlimited army at your disposal. Right now, that army is untrained and unable to work together. I aim to fix that. Naruto's mood brightened. Let it never be said that Naruto Uzumaki ever turned down special training. So, every day after our normal missions or training, you and I are going to stay behind. I'm going to help you develop your own taijutsu style that emphasizes your strengths and your shadow clones. One thing we're going to work on is how fast you can create them. With your chakra system, you shouldn't even have to build any chakra, just take what's already flowing through your system. I want you to start practicing that tonight. It's harder than it sounds, so don't be upset if you don't get it right away. After that, I'm going to teach you a one-handed tiger seal. By the time we're done, you're going to be able to make small groups of clones on the fly, work with them efficiently, and be a lot more dangerous. It had been almost 2 months since Kakashi had started teaching Naruto how to use his shadow clones more effectively. The Jonin had taken him back to the basics, at first reinforcing his chakra control and academy taijutsu, but the blonde had picked it up fast. It was amazing what he could do with a teacher who actually wanted him to succeed. Kakashi had been a patient, if demanding, instructor. It was a side of the masked ninja that Naruto had never seen. Almost every day, he had Naruto practicing with his shadow clones. The silver-haired shinobi limited the teen to 4 at a time, which meant that there would be 5 Narutos on the field at any given moment. He'd been drilled a lot in formations and small group tactics, and Naruto had the sneaking suspicion that they were formations that the Jonin had used in his time with Anbu. They had developed a personalized taijutsu style for the blonde, and he was immensely proud of it. The style took full advantage of the fact that the shadow clones were expendable and infinite. The copies would block attacks, use risky tactics to put his opponents off balance, and efficiently overwhelm his opponent. The few times he'd sparred with Satsuki using his clone-style taijutsu, as Naruto had dubbed it, he'd come out on top. The ebony-haired Uchiha hadn't taken kindly to losing, and had started demanding extra training from their sensei, as well. Even Sakura had improved, though not nearly as much as her teammates. Naruto felt slightly guilty for taking up so much of his sensei's time, but it seemed to be time that Kakashi was more than willing to give. The blonde teen had a feeling that his sensei had been offended at Jiraiya's attempts to poach his student, and was trying to show the ex-Jinchuriki that he didn't need to go elsewhere to gain strength. Even though Kakashi was monopolizing a lot of Naruto's time, the blonde still made a point to learn from Jiraiya as often as he could. The Sannin was even more demanding than Kakashi, insisting on perfection from every character on every practice array that Naruto drew. Jiraiya had explained that if a single character is misdrawn even the slightest amount, the entire array could fail, implode, or worse. Thus, Naruto was extremely careful while drawing his seals and more than a little hesitant about activating them, even though the practice seals he'd been working on did nothing more than glow in 2 or 3 harmonious colors, depending on the array. If a character was out of place or in any way incorrect, the activated array itself would show it to him where, because the activated seal, any wrong characters would clash horribly with the rest. While he'd yet to have a completely perfect practice seal, he'd come close on numerous occasions. The Sannin had promised to show him something truly awesome once he'd mastered one, though, so Naruto had taken to practicing arrays while waiting for Kakashi to show up each morning. Honestly, Naruto didn't know why everyone didn't dabble at least a bit in Fuinjutsu. It wasn't that hard. Each symbol meant something, though that meaning could change depending on the symbols next to it and the purpose of the array. It held a certain logic that the teen found fascinating. Iruka had been shocked silent when he'd walked into Ichiraku's one evening and seen his former student with his nose in one hand and a calligraphy pen in the other. Naruto had tried to explain to his old sensei what he was working on, but the entire idea seemed to go over the Chunin's head. Jiraiya taught him more than just Fuinjutsu, however. The big man would often talk at length about his journeys and all the things he'd seen and done. Naruto was enthralled, though he was sure that Jiraiya embellished quite a bit. The blonde genin didn't care though, as he enjoyed the stories all the same. The Sannin had a flair for storytelling, and Naruto was certain that if he wrote about his own travels instead of trashy romances that he'd be a much more renowned author. Things had been going really well with his team, which Naruto was really happy about. He and Satsuki had a small rivalry, though not nearly as intense as his burning desire to defeat Kiba. Sakura had been nice to him, too. She'd even invited him to hang out with Kiba and Ino a couple times, though he'd been too busy training to go along. Oddly enough, Satsuki got irritated every time the Yamanaka girl was mentioned in her presence, but Naruto didn't think too much of it. Jiraiya had told him that women rarely got along with each other, especially when a boy was involved. Sometimes Naruto wondered if Satsuki and Ino were fighting over a boy, and which one it could be. The Uchiha princess had been kind of hands-on with him lately, and not in a "I'm going to beat you to a bloody pulp" kind of way. She'd touch his arm while talking to him or occasionally pull his head into her lap while they talked, toying with his blonde locks as they talked late into the evening. Sometimes they'd speak of serious things, like what they wanted to do with their lives and where they wanted to go. Occasionally her answers made him uncomfortable, especially when it came to her brother, but Naruto always hastily changed the topic. It turned out they had a lot in common. Both were the last members of their clans in Konoha, both had spent the majority of their childhoods alone, and both had been forced to grow up and take care of themselves long before their peers. Other times they'd simply joke around and spend the late afternoon chatting and laughing. Naruto couldn't remember ever hearing her laugh before, but he'd immediately been enchanted with the melodious sound. He'd quickly resolved to make her laugh as often as possible. She'd swat the top of his head if he got too silly, though it was never hard enough to actually hurt. The few times the pair gotten chummy in front of Sakura, though, Satsuki had spent half the time glaring at the rosette when she thought that he wasn't looking. He had no idea why, but apparently Sakura did. The other girl would simply roll her eyes in exasperation. Kakashi had noticed 2 of his students getting closer, if his leading comments were anything to go by. He'd taken to teasing Naruto during their training sessions, making him blush darker than Sakura's hair. No matter what Kakashi said, however, Naruto wasn't in love with Satsuki. She was just a close friend, who made his day brighter every time she looked at him. That was completely normal, right? D-rank missions were boring as ever. It had turned into a daily thing. Get up. Wait for Kakashi. Get mission. Do degrading work. Train till you drop. Go to bed. The saddest part was that Gama-chan wasn't getting any fatter. Jiraiya had insisted that Naruto should buy his own sealing paper, a process that the Sannin claimed would drive him to succeed faster. Naruto suspected that it was more like the old man was cheap. Either way, the genin had found quickly that learning how to draw the characters for seals consumed a lot of paper, and sealing paper wasn't cheap when bought in bulk. Naruto reached the bridge at his normal time and both girls were already there, as usual. Each gave him a smile and a wave, which he eagerly returned. Sitting down in the middle of the bridge, he started unpacking his sealing supplies from his backpack before Satsuki's soft voice distracted him. Naruto. I bought you something you might like. The words came out too fast for Naruto to catch. The girl had gone beet red and wasn't looking at him. He noticed a large wooden case under one arm. I'm sorry, what was that? I got you something. Just take it already, she huffed, holding the case out to him. Naruto took it cautiously, while Sakura looked on in disapproving silence. Carefully opening the lid, he saw 20 identical, flawless kunai resting on a bed of blue velvet. Awestruck, he lifted one gingerly from its cradle. It wasn't nearly as dark as most kunai he'd seen. Where all of his previous knives had been a dark iron color, these were a bright silver. An orange tassel, precisely matching his long-forgotten jumpsuits, hung from the ring. Looking closely, he noticed a black Uzumaki swirl engraved where the hilt met the blade. Turning the weapon over, he saw the Uchiha fan in the same spot on the reverse side. They were easily the best kunai he'd ever seen, much less used. Each was flawlessly balanced and razor-sharp. They were obviously custom-made and very expensive. I noticed your kunai weren't that great, so I thought. Do you like them? Naruto turned his gaze away from the weapon in his hands. Satsuki was looking at him uncertainly, her obsidian eyes trying to read his face for clues. Overwhelmed with emotion, he pulled her into a tight hug. I take it that you like them, then. Her soft breath was warm against his neck. They're the best gift I've ever had. You have no idea what it means to me. Thank you. She could feel her smile against him, a sensation he quite enjoyed. She pulled back and looked into his cerulean gaze, ruffling his hair with a soft hand. Well, don't go reading too much into it, Dobie, she mocked. If you're going to be watching my back, then you're not going to do it with those discount kunai you always use. Just don't go attaching any explosive tags to them, you'll burn the tassels. Naruto nodded. He had considered not using them at all to preserve the gift from one of his closest friends, but he knew that if he didn't use them, she'd get offended. He vowed to be extremely careful, collecting each and every one after a fight. He failed to notice Sakura glaring at both Satsuki and the kunai. Yo! 3 pairs of eyes turned to see a masked Kakashi standing at one end of the bridge. Sorry I'm late, but a kitten was stuck in a tree. I'm sure you understand. The Jonin's excuses were beginning to grow on Naruto, and he had sometimes wondered how long he could go without repeating one. Naruto then wondered if he'd even notice if Kakashi did. It's not like he kept a list of Kakashi tardiness excuses. The team knew that he was full of it, and Kakashi knew that he knew. It had become a sort of comforting morning ritual for the entire team. Nice kunai, Naruto. The blonde just beamed at him as he unpacked the knives from their box and sliding them into his holster. He had to remove quite a few of his old kunai, but he made sure to save a few for explosive purposes. So what are we doing today, sensei? Hold on to your headbands, kiddos, but we're going to get a C-rank mission. You're all more than ready. Team 7 was lined up in front of the Hokage, eagerly awaiting their first C-rank mission. Naruto was literally trembling with anticipation. He was finally going to leave the village. One of the reasons he had wanted to become a ninja was to see the world, and he was finally getting his chance. He didn't care if the mission was simply delivering a message or saving a lost princess. Scratch that, he would definitely save the lost princess. Kakashi, are you certain your team is ready? The Hokage solemnly asked the masked Jonin, though amusement danced in his eyes. I am, Hokage-sama. They are more than ready. I have complete confidence in all of them. The Jonin knew that the pomp and circumstance was for the Genin's benefit. He was more than willing to play along. It was an important moment for his young students, and he wouldn't sully the experience. The Sandaime puffed on his pipe and regarded the Genin carefully. Very well. I happen to have a C-rank mission here. He handed a scroll to Kakashi. Your mission is to protect the bridge builder. You are to escort him to his island village in the land of waves and guard him while he finishes building a bridge to the mainland. He took a moment to call in his secretary. If you would kindly escort Tazuna to meet the squad that will serve as his protection. The secretary nodded and left, reappearing moments later with an older man. The new arrival was large and well built, with gray hair and beard. Oddly, he wore a slender rope around his forehead, barely visible beneath his large hat. Tazuna, this is Team 7. I have assigned them to you for your protection. They will meet you at the village's gate in an hour. Tazuna regarded the three genin with a frown. I paid for ninja, not a bunch of kids. Do you expect me to believe that these brats can protect me? Why you? Sakura exploded, but was stopped by Naruto's hand on her shoulder. We are more than capable, the blonde said solemnly, his bright blue eyes meeting Tazuna's. We will protect you with our lives. Satsuki nodded at his side, while Sakura huffed in annoyance. Tazuna seemed taken aback. Whether they're capable or not doesn't really matter. We're the squad you're getting. If you don't like it, you're more than welcome to a refund. I'm sure there's not too many bandits between here and the land of waves. Kakashi had stepped behind his team, his hands resting on their shoulders and giving the old man one of his trademarked eye smiles. Tazuna grimaced, but nodded. Well, I guess you'll have to be good enough. I'll see you at the gate. Well done, my cute genin. While we must treat our clients with respect, we must also be firm. We can't cave to childish demands. Now go pack for a long journey. I have a feeling we won't be home for a while, so say your goodbyes to your loved ones. The sun was shining over Team 7 as the group left the village. Naruto had hurriedly found Iruka and told him he'd be gone for a while, asking him to let Choji and Shika know where he'd gone. The Chunin had ruffled Naruto's hair and wished him good luck. He bade the team to be safe and take care of his team. Naruto had tried to find Jiraiya as well, but the old perv was nowhere to be found. He knew that Jiraiya was close to the Hokage, so he didn't worry about it too much. Satsuki and Naruto walked in front, side by side, while Sakura and Tazuna followed.